Hey, McNut here. Scientists aren't often celebrated during their lifetime. In fact, many scientists have been misunderstood and even ridiculed during their time on Earth. It's tough being on the cutting edge of thought, and great minds or visionaries are commonly dismissed as loons, or so I hear. Sure, we celebrate the Newtons and the Einsteins, but what about the Clair Pattersons? Clair Patterson. Do you know the name? If you do, it's likely because you, like me, paid attention during the reboot of the Cosmos series in 2014 with world-class explainer of complicated things, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you found yourself saying, "Why have I not heard of this man?" Or maybe you stumbled across a YouTube video with a dangly, delicious clickbait title like "The Man Who Killed Millions But Saved Billions." I can promise you, this man deserves to be mentioned alongside any real-life hero. Anyone you want to name, this scientist has almost certainly saved more people. Think of Clair Patterson as Captain America's shield, protecting the innocent and striking fear into the hearts of bullies. If Patterson weren't burdened with integrity, you'd be walking around with about
"You like guacamole?"
50 less IQ points than you currently have, and your life expectancy and those critical life-giving assets like water and clean air would be far less beneficial to you. Apologies for the long intro, but when it comes to celebrating people who make a difference,
I could do this all day.
Patterson grew up in a small Iowa farm community and basically went to a little house on the prairie type school. Like many people, his childhood was significant to the person he would later become. Between the ages of 8 and 12, he and his friends used to head down to the river bottoms on weekends with no parents. Maybe they brought along a sandwich from mom, but they also hunted and fished for their own food, cooked it, made shelters, and basically had an amazing childhood full of adventure and freedom. These childhood adventures created a strong bond between Patterson and the world around him. He was able to clearly see and understand what was natural and what was not. He often found the bones of dead animals, brought them home, and reassembled the deceased in order to identify the Rainbow Bridge critter. There also happened to be Native American burial mounds nearby, and it was common to find arrowheads laying about. His awareness and curiosity of these ancient people helped provide evidence for Patterson's greatest challenge years later. By the 8th grade, Patterson had built a chemistry lab in his basement. Despite his friends not sharing his interest in science and chemistry, his fascination with the world around him grew and grew. However, his teachers were well aware of his interest because if they got something wrong, young Clair was compelled to stand up, use his voice, and point out where others were wrong. Incredibly, his parents and teachers not only allowed this behavior, but encouraged it, and they should get credit for helping empower him to essentially save humanity just a couple decades later. He wasn't trying to be combative, he wanted to make sure that teachers and the other students had the correct information. Patterson himself stated that he didn't think this type of freedom to challenge authority would have been encouraged in larger cities with packed classrooms. And, let's be honest, what good is a profound discovery if you lack the courage to stand up to those who wish to suppress it? Most people who know of Patterson will have two main headlines. He worked on the Manhattan Project, and he determined the age of our planet. Yes, he worked on the Manhattan Project. No, he was not a character in the Oppenheimer movie. He did not work at Los Alamos. His work was primarily at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, focusing on the separation and purification of uranium isotopes critical for producing the highly enriched uranium necessary for nuclear fission. What he took from this experience and pushed forward was his ability to fine-tune detailed isotopic measurements, as well as his ability to create highly controlled working environments. Both were essential to his ability to understand how we were destroying life on this planet by combining and advancing his knowledge of geochemistry and environmental sciences. Real quick, when I say destroying all life on planet Earth, does that scare the hell out of you? It should. We were that close. I worry that words for such immensely catastrophic imagery are simply all too often inadequate, and that we all take life and living for granted. Back to our story. After the war, he and his wife Lori moved to Chicago to continue his studies. It was in Chicago that he met Harrison Brown, an accomplished professor who also worked on the Manhattan Project and a master fundraiser. It was Harrison Brown who tasked Patterson to find the age of the Earth using his already advanced abilities to measure lead. This seemingly simple assignment is what led Patterson to stumble upon a bizarre anomaly that was as perplexing as it was mysterious. All right, stay with me here. Patterson and a younger student named George Tilton teamed up on the Age of the Earth project. Tilton had experience in uranium while Patterson had more experience in lead. They would be focused on a common material called zircon. Yes, just like the jewelry. Zircon has tiny crystals that can be found in trace amounts of ordinary igneous rock. When those rocks were formed from cooling magma back at the beginning of time, these teeny tiny zircon crystals had uranium but not lead. Over time, the original uranium decays to become lead. This decay allows for uranium to lead measurements. Here's the challenge. The amounts of uranium are only a few parts per million, and the amounts of lead is significantly smaller. Harrison Brown wanted these two bright young minds to develop spectrometric techniques to determine the composition of a material by analyzing the light it emits or absorbs. The goal was to measure the amounts of uranium and study the isotopic compositions and amounts of lead that would be 1,000 times smaller than anything anyone had ever looked at previously. Then those numbers would be simply compared to the primordial lead and iron meteorites, meaning the lead had been floating in space since the Big Bang thing happened. That comparison would yield the age of the Earth. Easy peasy. Thanks for sticking with me on that. Tilton's work was completed with relative ease, but Patterson kept hitting the same snag over and over. His samples were contaminated with additional lead. A lot of it. Too much of it. It was everywhere, on everything. Everything. So what? Who cares? Well, in addition to wrecking his science project, lead is a powerfully dangerous neurotoxin. Patterson was somehow tracking it into his lab. It was on his instruments, on him. Now, I'm going to grossly simplify this, but it took him 6 years to find a way to get a clean sample. And along the way, he invented the clean lab. He had to. It was cleaned with acid. Sterile suits were worn. He went to every extreme imaginable, as he was almost certainly going bonkers every time he found more lead contamination. All he wanted was a clean sample, and that was next to impossible to achieve. At last, he pulled off the impossible, and Earth was declared to be 4.5 billion years old. To really comprehend the significance of Earth's age and the moment that Patterson isolated, consider this Patterson quote. "You must recognize that this number I had measured related to the time of coalescing of this planet out of the solar disk. You see, there was a formation of all other planets going on too, big ones, little ones, even the asteroids which were swirling around. This was the time of segregation from the solar mass into this separate little body, Earth." Despite this achievement, Patterson hardly celebrated. It's almost like he had formed a grudge against this abundance of atmospheric lead that was literally everywhere, on every single item, person, product, and breath you take. It was inescapable, and he wanted to know, he had to know the source. Where was this toxic substance coming from? It didn't make any sense. How could a deadly neurotoxin be everywhere on everything? To be clear, lead causes all kinds of issues, especially in children, affecting brain development and leading to cognitive impairments, reduced IQ, learning disabilities, and behavioral issues. Even low levels of exposure result in permanent damage. In adults, lead exposure can cause headaches, irritability, decreased cognitive function, but that's not all. You also get hypertension, heart disease, cardiovascular issues, kidney damage, reproductive failure, premature birth, memory loss, and it's a really long list, and this includes the presence of lead in water, soil, and the atmosphere, which is where Patterson was finding it. So no, I'm not exaggerating when I say that this man, Clair Patterson, whether he knew it or not at this particular time, was the only man on the planet with the knowledge, skill, awareness, persistence, and hopefully the integrity to counter this massive assault on planet Earth. Patterson turned his scientific eye to the task of determining just how much lead appears in the world naturally. Establishing a baseline level is critical to determine the severity of the danger. What levels of lead naturally occur in our bodies, in the atmosphere, in our water and soil? Time and money became instant factors. Once again, Harrison Brown stepped up to the funding plate and was able to get oil companies, yes, those guys, to fund Patterson's research. Harrison told them that Patterson's study would help them more accurately find places to drill. That's a heck of a spin because it wasn't true in the slightest teeny tiny bit. not in any way, shape, or remote possibility. Harrison loved to get other people to fund his people. He didn't really mind bending a fact or intention here and there to get it done, as long as the project had real value. Patterson received core samples from the oil companies and was able to begin ciphering critical details about past eras going back thousands of years. He was able to begin building a profile of lead levels throughout history. He turned to water samples at various depths in the ocean, going from the surface 4 miles down. This was a hugely complicated endeavor. Patterson didn't farm the work out to others. He was on the ship, firing vomit comets overboard as he supervised the collection and storage of his samples. It was a miserable experience, but he fought through it. Why?
Because that's what heroes do.
He had to get this right. It takes a long time for the various depths of ocean water to mix, meaning that his samples would yield information about various periods of time throughout history. The water that was the deepest should have the most lead, but that's not what Patterson found. The water at the surface was significantly higher. This means the issue was not from the past and not consistent with historical numbers. It was a new danger. Remember, Patterson at this particular time is the only person that can accurately measure these minute levels of lead because he had the only clean lab in existence. Most of the scientists had yet to comprehend this problem of pigpen lead contamination. They simply weren't aware that they were walking around, wading through, and breathing in neurotoxins everywhere they went. But there were others gathering valuable data. Patterson was able to use the data of those attempting to measure the lead levels in river water that was flowing to the ocean. He was able to plug that data into his superior calculations and add greater levels of detail to his own analysis. Finally, the culprit was revealed: tetraethyl gasoline. Tetraethyl gasoline, think leaded gasoline, was invented by Thomas Midgley to help stop engine knock in internal combustion engines. It worked like a charm. However, as you likely know by now, it was also one of the worst ideas of all time, and Midgley knew it. He staged press conferences to show how safe his product was and simply flat out lied to the world. While he was doing this, the factory workers in proximity to tetraethyl suffered immediately from the toxic product, including hallucinations, delirium, paralysis, and convulsions. The most severe cases included comas and death, and these symptoms started within days of production. Shockingly, or predictably, the industry worked hard to hide these truths from the public. Oh, fun fact, supervillain Thomas Midgley went on to invent chlorofluorocarbons, which nearly wiped out the ozone layer that protects our upper atmosphere, blocks the vast majority of cancer-causing UV rays, and helps to regulate Earth's temperature so we don't all become deep-fried chicken strips. Some people. Here's what Patterson had to say about his findings. If you took those profiles and you extrapolated from that over all the world's oceans, the amount of lead equaled what was being produced from gasoline. It could easily be accounted for by the amount of lead that was put into the gasoline and burned and put into the atmosphere. We had tons more put into the atmosphere from the lead gasoline than we could see in the upper part of the world's oceans right there. And that's what caused the problem. The oil companies were financing my work. We were in serious trouble. Let's pause here for a moment. So Patterson has just determined that the oil industry is literally killing all life on Earth. You have to wonder, is there a universe out there where a giant corporation might be thrilled to have this information so they can course correct, do something else, solve that problem, save the whales, the people, the trees, the bees, all life on the only planet to have life in the known universe? No. Nope. Not a chance. That is simply not how corporations work. Back to Harrison Brown. Remember the rock star that supported Patterson's work with creative grant proposals? How did he respond to Patterson's ace detective work and ninja-like sciencing? Well, he was out. Gone. Poof. Vanished. Now, I don't want to bang on Brown too hard because he was a very accomplished scientist in his own right, and standing up to those in power can be terrifying, especially when your livelihood is threatened. But what did Patterson do when he was told to drop the issue? He published his findings, saying all of the dangerous lead was coming from leaded gasoline. Yeah, his funding quickly evaporated. This is critical to understand and even appreciate. Patterson discovered something that was harming and even killing many thousands of people and knew this would get far worse by the day if something wasn't done. And there was an immediate campaign to completely silence him so the deadly lead could continue to freely flow. All of Patterson's funding sources, including those from the universities, were heavily pressured to cut him loose. Now, I do have to say, congrats to Caltech. Patterson was at Caltech during this time, and the institution stood firm. Patterson has stated that without Caltech, there would be no Clair Patterson. Kudos, Caltech. Patterson could have simply turned to another field of study or taken on any other challenge. He could have easily brushed his findings under the ocean rug and even stuffed that unfortunate Tetraethyl genie back in the bottle of scary secrets. But he couldn't allow this deadly discovery to be tossed in the back of the corporate closet of skeleton storage. He had to stand up, use his voice, and point out where others were wrong. Why?
Because that's what heroes do.
Patterson knew a fight was coming, and his only weapon was knowledge, real, verifiable data. He needed to get to where there was annual snowfall that didn't melt away each year. Atmospheric lead would be in the snow, and there would be year-to-year records in the layers of ice cores. He would be able to see if the lead levels had spiked and whether or not they were consistent or higher than previous years, decades, even centuries. To be clear, the opposing forces here are simply all living things and the profit of fossil fuel companies. Fun fact, if you know where to look, this battle is still being fought today all around you. Patterson wrote a letter explaining his terrible discovery to Senator Edmund S. Muskie from Maine, who was curious enough to take a look and hold a hearing on the matter. Somehow, remarkably, inexplicably, and predictably, the oil company was able to influence the scheduling of this important hearing when Patterson was away at the North Pole gathering the exact data to prove his case. If you're familiar with the tobacco industry's gaslighting their own personal health crisis, you know what was about to happen at this hearing. Dr. Robert Kehoe, the faux expert that the lead industry put forward, claimed to be the world's leading expert in this area and insisted that lead was absolutely safe. With Patterson out of pocket, their plan was going exactly to plan. The plan was going exactly to plan. But suddenly, on day 5 of the hearing, Patterson used his size 12 boot and kicked the doors off the congressional hinges. Well, not really, but maybe in the movie. Fingers crossed. On day 5, Patterson unexpectedly arrived, truly the most capable man on the planet to discuss atmospheric lead. I really want to say that he just started smacking the lies out of people's mouth. But he sat and answered questions and exposed the industry for the harm it was doing. Of course, he's a scientist with years of experience, so he had receipts. The problem was that no one else could verify his work. He was too far ahead of his colleagues, and remember, he had the only clean lab that could measure lead properly due to the abundance of lead contamination. Get this, the water used in non-Patterson labs that was considered pure and sufficient for testing purposes had 1,000 times more lead than the snow samples Patterson collected in the Arctic. But Patterson did properly expose the lies, reveal the truth, and set in motion the regulations that would eventually see lead phased out and safety standards raised for workers. Listen to this statement by Patterson from an interview in 1995. Do you realize that 1 drop on your skin of pure tetraethyl lead will kill you? 1 drop. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks and you die with clinically similar symptoms to rabies hitting the central nervous system. It passes the membrane and gets into the brain. And it poisons the brain. And it takes about 2 or 3 weeks and you're dead. 1 drop. Keeping that in mind, knowing that the lead industry and the oil industry were also aware of all of this, now reflect on Dr. Kehoe, claiming to be an expert and stating before a congressional hearing that lead tetraethyl was completely safe. I should point out that I severely abbreviated Patterson's research and deep dives on this subject. He also collected magma from volcanoes, water samples from other oceans and land masses, the bones of ancient native peoples, lead and silver coins from the Roman era, and the graves of tens of thousands of Roman slaves that died from mining lead, etc., etc., etc. This man was thorough. Incredibly, Patterson became fascinated with what in the human mind allows us to continue to make these horrific decisions. We've known about the dangers of lead for thousands of years, and yet, even today, It's being used, and somehow most people aren't even aware of the dangers of lead in something as simple as ammunition or fishing weights. Want to see something weird? Go to ChatGPT and ask, what are the 20 most common items lead is used for today? If lead is still being used today, does Clair Patterson qualify as being a hero? Yes, of course. His 20-year effort, as well as the efforts of others, did get the lead out of gasoline, and the reduction of toxic lead levels in humans has dropped significantly since then. Many battles are long fought, and all battles, especially those against impossible odds, take many heroes. There's a link in the description of a fantastic interview with Patterson just a few months prior to his death. That interview was the source for much of the information in this video. So, thank you, Clair Patterson, and thank you for watching. McNut out.